I've been diving into the Pennsylvania magazine, America's Monthly Museum, I believe it's called, from about 1775, because it has an amazing collection of articles and different things from that time, which fascinates me because it's a year before the Revolution. And so I think that they were kind of, things were a little looser with what they were putting out. But particularly this magazine and this monthly thing has just an incredible editor or something, because pretty much everything in it is really interesting and from a unique perspective, and from whether it's patriotic or about the foundings and Congress and stuff like that, or just about the world and about different writings and passages and different things that they pick from around the world are just really excellent. Like the editor, I'm telling you, just did a great job picking good things. Every one of them's fascinating. I keep just turning over to the next. And it seems like this magazine only kind of really occurred in the 1775, but I'd love to find some from earlier and later, if possible, because it seems like it was already well established at the time where I'm reading this. But this particular article that I want to talk about today is awesome. It says, an extract from the letters of M. de Maupertuis to the King of Prussia on the progress of the sciences. So it talks about everything from giants to Australia to Africa to the compass to the shape of the earth, all these different things. And so I wanted to blast that out because it's kind of reminiscent of the talk I had with Chinny in Aruba, which is a previous video. And all mine kind of end up connecting and piecing themselves together in ways that are similar, in similar chunks at a time, and then the whole kind of starts to illuminate itself. So I want you guys to check this out because I think it has some interesting stuff, and I'll just slap some pictures and art from all over time that is somewhat relevant and somewhat random as well, but gets you in the mood. And so I think you all will like this. Let me know what you think. I'll chime in from here and there because there's some really interesting stuff in here. Again, letters to the King of Prussia on the progress of the sciences via 1770s. So here we go. Some things haven't changed, some things have changed, but the spirit of discovery is in there in this passage, and it's just interesting to see how time has taken a lot of these topics, and a lot of them are stuff we're still interested in today. And so it's almost like, progress had to have been halted intentionally, because after 300 years, some things still remain unknown, supposedly, to us. So here we go. It's going to start with the Terra Australis. It's well known that in the southern hemisphere there is a space larger than any of the four parts of the known world, and no prince in any age wherein navigation has been so greatly improved has had the curiosity to send to discover whether this space consists of land or sea. In all the known parts of the globe there is no other space of such vast extent as this unknown region, quite covered with water. It is therefore more probable that we should find land in this unknown region than a continued sea. To this general observation we might add the relations of those who, in their voyages in the southern hemisphere, have discovered points, capes, and undoubted signs of a continent, from which they were at no great distance. The journals that mention these things are too many to be mentioned here. Some of the more advanced capes are even laid down in the charts. The French East India Company sent some years ago in quest of the southern lands that lie between America and Africa. Captain Losey Bouvet, who had the chief command in this expedition, in sailing eastward between those two parts of the world, found continual signs of adjacent land. During a course of 48 degrees and at length about 52 degrees of latitude, he discovered a cape at which the ice hindered him from landing. Supposing the chief motive for discovering the Terra Australis to be only to find a harbor for the conveniency of ships trading to the East Indies, which was the view of the French East India Company, it might easily be shown that they did not pursue the properest measures, and that they abandoned the enterprise too soon. Some directions might have been given for their succeeding better, but as your Majesty views in the discovery of the southern region ought not to be confined to the utility of such a harbor, which in my opinion ought to be one of the weakest motives for undertaking it. The lands situated to the east of the Cape of Good Hope would much better deserve to be sought after than those between America and Africa. In fact, the capes that have been discovered evidently prove that the southern lands to the east of Africa approach nearest to the equator and extend to those climates wherein we find the most precious productions of nature. It would be difficult to make any well-grounded conjectures on the product and inhabitants of those countries, but there is one observation sufficient to excite curiosity and make us suspect that we should find things in them very different from what are contained in other parts of the world. We know that 3 of those parts, viz. Europe, Asia, and Africa, forms but one continent. America perhaps joins to it, or if it be only separated from it by a strait, there must still be a communication between those 4 parts of the world. The same plants, the same animals, the same men must gradually have spread throughout the whole as far as the difference of the climate would suffer them to live and multiply. And to this difference alone the alterations they have undergone must be ascribed. But the case is quite different with the several species that inhabit the Terra Australis, for they could never have gone out of their own continent. The globe has been often circumnavigated, and these lands have been always left on the same side. It is certain that they are absolutely unconnected with any other land, and that they form, as it were, a new world apart, in which it is difficult to foresee what we should find. The discovery of these countries might therefore furnish vast advantages for trade and open an amazing field for natural philosophy. Besides, the Terra Australis is not confined to the large continent situated in the southern hemisphere. In all probability, there are many islands between Japan and America, the discovery of which might be of great importance. Is it to be imagined that the valuable spices which are now become so necessary to all Europe grow only in some of these isles, of which a certain nation has got possession? This nation perhaps knows of many others that equally produce them, the discovery of which it is careful to conceal. In some of these islands, navigators assure us they have seen savages, men covered with hair, having tails, a middle species between a monkey and a man. I would rather have an hour's conversation with one of these than with the greatest wit in Europe. But if the East India Company wanted to find a harbor in the Terra Australis between America and Africa for the conveniency of their trade, they ought not, in my opinion, to have been discouraged by the little success of their first attempt. On the contrary, the narrative of Captain Bouvet's voyage might engage the company to prosecute it, for he made himself certain of the existence of these countries. He saw them, and the obstacles which prevented his going nearer to them may be avoided or surmounted. He was hindered from landing by ice, which he was surprised to find at latitude 50 during the summer solstice, but he ought to have considered that caeteris paribus, the cold, is greater in the southern hemisphere than in the northern, because though in the same latitude of each hemisphere the position of the sphere be the same, the distance of the earth from the sun in the corresponding seasons is not equal, because it's different than they think. Winter happens in our hemisphere when the earth is at its least distance from the sun. In this circumstance diminishes the cold. In the southern hemisphere it is the contrary. Winter happens when the earth is at its greatest distance from the sun, which circumstance augments the force of the cold. Add to this, that in the southern hemisphere the winter is longer by 8 days than in the northern. But it would still have been more necessary to have considered that in all places where the sphere is oblique, the greatest heat happens not till after the summer solstice, and comes on later in proportion to the coldness of the climate. This is well known to naturalists, and to all who have sailed toward the poles. In the northern hemisphere, we often see during the solstice seas quite covered with ice, where a month after not a bit is to be found, but on the contrary, very hot weather, and this is precisely the time, namely during the greatest cold in the opposite hemisphere, for attempting to approach the countries adjacent to the poles. When the frost begins to break, the ice melts very fast, and in a few days the sea is quite open. If therefore, instead of arriving in those latitudes where Captain Bouvet sought the Terra Australis at the time of the solstice, he had arrived a month later, he would probably have found no ice. After all, ice is not an unsurmountable objection to landing. If it floats, those who are employed in the whale fishery or who navigate the northern seas knows that it doth not stop a ship's course, and as to the ice that adheres to the coast, the inhabitants of the gulfs of Finland and Bohemia have roads over such ice all the winter, and often make roads over it by choice rather than on the land. The people of the north have another simple and sure method when they happen to be near the ice when the frost breaks. They make use of light boats which they draw after them, and in these they go from one piece of ice to another. There are things well known in the northern countries, and had those whom the company sent in quest of Terra Australis been better skilled in the natural history of those climates and the resources there employed, there is ground to believe that by arriving later they would not have met any ice, or the ice would not have hindered them from landing on a coast which by their own account was not at the distance of 1 or 2 leagues. So that has a lot about kind of almost questioning the shape of their world, because their math and their technical aspects that make everything seem so smooth and relating to latitudes and whatnot is not what it seems. And so there's different things, and there's all kinds of different things, and I wouldn't be surprised if these East India companies found some astonishing stuff but did not tell the world, did not tell the public, did not want anyone else to know, because that's what people in power and companies in power do. And so this one's really cool, this next section, of the Patagons. I love this. Without being charged with being visionary or ridiculously curious, one may say that the country of the Patagons deserves to be inquired after. So many credible relations mention those giants that we cannot reasonably doubt of the existence of a country whose inhabitants are of a size so very different from ours. The philosophic transactions of the Royal Society of London make mention of a skull that must have belonged to one of these giants, whose height, by an exact comparison of his skull with ours, must have been 10 or 12 feet. If we consider the thing in a philosophical light, it is astonishing that we do not find the same variation of the size of men as in several other species. To keep as near as the human species as possible, there is a greater difference between the different species of monkeys than between the smallest Laplander and the largest giants mentioned by travelers. It's always very true. Are we the domestic house cats in comparison to the lions that must have been out there? These men deserve undoubtedly to be known. The largeness of their bodies would be the thing least worthy our observation. Their ideas, their knowledge, would furnish new matter of curiosity. I think that is a phenomenal truth, because really, their size is one thing, but it's their history, their knowledge, their minds, their discoveries, their creations, their inventions. If they are as bigger than us, then maybe they have exceeded us in all those other categories as well. Pretty interesting. Of the North Passage. After finding out the Terra Australis, another discovery quite opposite would remain to be made in the northern seas, namely that of a shorter passage to the Indies than by doubling the southern points of Africa or America. The English, Dutch, and Danes have often attempted the discovery of this passage, of which the utility is very manifest, but the possibility problematical. This passage has been sought by the northeast and northwest, but never found. These attempts, however, though of no use to those that made them, will be of great use to those who shall prosecute the discovery. They show that if there be a passage by either of these ways, it must be extremely difficult, as it lies through straits that in those northern seas are almost always shut up with ice. The conclusion to which all who have been in quest of this passage have come to is, that it must be attempted due north for fear of the extreme cold. If they steered too near the pole, the navigators did not stand off far enough from the land, and always found the seas shut up with ice. Whether it was that the places where they wanted to pass were gulfs only, or whether they were really straits, it is a kind of paradox to say that they would have found less ice in a milder climate near the pole. But besides the relations which assure us, some Dutchmen who were driven very near the pole found an open and a calm sea and a temperate air. Natural history and astronomy make the fact credible. If the polar region consists of a vast ocean, we should certainly find less ice in it than in places farther south, where the sea is hemmed in by land, and the continuance of the sea in the horizon for 6 months must occasion a greater heat that is lost by the smallness of his meridian altitude. I therefore think that this passage must be attempted by the pole itself, and at the same time that we might hope and make a very useful discovery for trade, it would be a very curious one towards gaining a better knowledge of the globe, to learn whether the point round which it turns be on the land or on the sea, to observe the phenomenon of the lodestone at the source whence they seem to proceed, and to determine the aurora borealis are caused by a luminous matter issuing from the pole, or at least whether the pole be always covered with the matter of these aurora. It's very interesting. We should be finding this stuff out. We should all know this stuff. But yet today, you hear the same stuff in the news. Oh, Russia's doing something. They're doing blah, blah, blah. It's just all kept hidden. No one will bite. No one will blow the whistle, but they should. I shall not at present take notice of the difficulties attending this voyage. The assistance which the pilot derives from his art will diminish in proportion as the vessel approaches the pole, and much of it will cease at the pole itself. This fatal point might therefore be avoided, but if the vessel should come to it, she must be suffered to drive till she be at such a distance that the rules of navigation may again be made use of. I shall not enlarge upon this head. What I propose is only to give a hint of such discoveries as I thought of most importance. It will be time enough, when your Majesty has determined which to prosecute, to concert the most proper methods for that end. But if some great prince would send out 2 or 3 ships every year upon such enterprises, the expense would be inconsiderable, and besides the advantages resulting from their success, they would be of great service in training up expert captains and pilots for all the events of any voyage. Interesting how they have the difference of captains and pilots in 1770s, because there is clearly a difference here. I'm not sure what it is. And it is scarce possible but that among so many things that remain unknown on our globe, we should attain to some very important discoveries. Although I still kind of do think the overall shape as a globe, 6 billion miles wide. That part that we live on is flat, I still think. But who knows? I'm up for anything, whatever the truth is. So this part I thought was also very cool. The next section says, observations on the variance of the needle, the variation of the needle compass. When we reflect on the use that hath been made of the direction of the needle to the pole, we cannot help concluding that this wonderful property was given it to guide the mariner. But as this property, of which we have but an imperfect knowledge, is at present of such service, it is highly probable that from a fuller acquaintance with it still farther advantages would result. The general direction of the needle towards the pole teaches us how to steer our courses, but the deviations from this direction, which are undoubtedly subject to some law, hitherto little known, will probably afford new methods reserved by nature for the mariner's assistance in finding out in what point of the globe he is. Some years ago, His Brittany Majesty sent out Mr. Halley in a vessel intended for the improvement of maritime knowledge. After a cruise in both hemispheres, this great astronomer traced a line upon the globe in which all the touched needles pointed due north, and their declinations increased in proportion to their distance from it. Such a line well ascertained would, in a great measure, supply what is still wanting for the knowledge of the longitude at sea. For, by observing the declination of the needle in any place, it would be easy to determine how far it lay to the east or west of any particular meridian. Other geographers have been of the opinion that Mr. Halley's line was not the only one upon the globe, and that some others had the same advantages. As the declination of the lodestone varies in the same place, these lines which have no declination cannot always be found in the same position, but if, as highly probable, their motion be regular and we could attain the knowledge of it, their utility would still be the same. It must be owned that what Mr. Halley hath said doth not amount to full evidence, but is it to be expected that such great enterprises can be completed at the first attempt? Nah. Or can we bestow too much pains to accomplish a discovery of such high importance? It cannot therefore be recommended too warmly to mariners, wherever they are able to make the most exact observations on the declination of the touched needle. These observations are necessary at present towards a right knowledge of their course, and accordingly are not wholly neglected, but they are not made with due care. The different inclinations of the touched needle in different places have made some able hydrographers think that a new method might from thence be derived, to find the place of a ship. These observations are still more difficult to be made than those of the declination, and can scarce be made with the necessary exactness, but they might be made at land in all the different regions, for it is one thing to make observations to find out a theory, and another to make observations in order to employ a theory already known. Very interesting. Yes, I don't know what the magnetic thing means, but the lodestone they refer to, is that from Mercator's map? Did they know of that already there, that some magnetic stone or some form is up there? What did they know? What did they not know? What are they hiding? Who knows? Of the continent of Africa. These are the principal discoveries to be attempted at sea. There are others on land which otherwise merit our attention. The immense continent of Africa, situate in the finest climate in the world, formerly inhabited by the most numerous and powerful nations, and filled with great cities, is scarce better known than the Terra Australis. We touch at its shores, but have never penetrated into the heart of the country. Yet if we reflect on its situation in the same climate with those places of America, which are most fertile in gold and silver, on the prodigious riches of the old world drawn from it, and on the quantity of gold it still yields to some of the savages without any labor, we must conclude that discoveries of no small importance to trade might be made in the continent of Africa. What we have read in ancient history of the arts and sciences which were cultivated by the nations that inhabited it, and the astonishing monuments thereof, still to be seen on the confines of Egypt, evidently show that this country is highly worthy of our curiosity. So this is almost like when they're just starting to tackle Africa. Like, they know that there were amazing cities there at one point. I wonder how many were then destroyed after this. Like, you know, after they started being like, okay, we want Africa for all its wealth and its treasure. And then I wonder what the true history of Africa really is, because it's definitely not what we're told. And then lastly, in this section, there's a part that says, of the pyramids and of cavities. Men have very justly reckoned these prodigious masses of earth and stone among the wonders of the world. Nevertheless, their use appears to us very trivial, or is unknown. The Egyptians seem to have been more desirous of exciting wonders than of communicating instruction. It is, however, scarce probable that these enormous pyramids were solely intended to enclose a dead body. They contain perhaps the most extraordinary monuments of the history and sciences of Egypt. About 900 years ago, a curious caliph, it is said, after much labor, at last discovered a small passage leading to a hall, in which is still to be seen a marble chest or kind of coffin. But how small a part doth this occupy in such an edifice? It is not highly probable that it contains many other things. The use of gunpowder renders the blowing up of one of these pyramids a matter of no difficulty at present, and the Grand Seigneur would readily give that permission to a king of France who should express the smallest curiosity to have it done. That's very interesting. If gunpowder at that point in the 1700s could easily blow up a pyramid and all this stuff, then how many things did they blow up? How long has this been going on? Gunpowder's been around since thousands of years in Asia, Tartary, and more. So how many things were they destroying? What were they doing to Egypt? There was some knowledge of these edifices from 9 centuries ago, and then how much has been excavated? How much has been blown up? How much has been trashed? And what did it look like in the 1700s and before? Always wonder about the prime. But here we go, one last bit. I should, however, have been much better pleased had the kings of Egypt employed the millions of men who reared those pyramids in the air and digging cavities in the earth, of a depth answerable to the marvelous we find in the works of those princes. We know nothing of the interior of the earth. Our deepest minds scarce penetrate to the shell. Could we get at the kernel, it is probable we should find matter very different from that which we know, and meet with some extraordinary phenomena. That force about which there have been so many disputes, and which supposing enlarged in all bodies, serves so well to explain nature, is only known by experiments made on the surface of the earth. It were much to be wished that its phenomena could be examined in such deep cavities. So this guy is just talking about the progress of science to the king of Prussia, and he's laying it all out there. All these different things that we're currently thinking about. Like, they just found another thing in mainstream archaeology, another tunnel in a pyramid, and they supposedly just found, and they're releasing to the public. And they're still putting out the tomb theory, that these were just tombs and nothing else. And back in the 1700s, they knew this stuff. It's like, it's insane when you see how little has progressed in the way of modern popular thought, and what the news and the sciences cults put out there now compared to what they knew back then. We keep finding articles that put them on the same level as us, and nothing's improved. Nothing's changed. The concepts are still pretty much the same, and that's pretty pathetic. I mean, we think a lot more like these people that are questioning everything, thank God. But a lot of the people in the mainstream just take everything that they say and everything that they hear as new, as cutting edge, that, oh wow, this discovery. Meanwhile, the thing's probably been open for hundreds of years. People have seen it thousands of years ago when it was real and people were just kind of strategically releasing things like constantly to us just to keep us satisfied, to keep the science going, to keep the lie continuing whenever they have a new piece of the puzzle that fits the stupid, lame narrative. And then people gobble it up on all the media, all these things. Anytime the media and them tell you anything, it's a lie. And was it the same in 1770s? Was this letter kind of a sleight of hand to try and detract from these places that they were knowing more about and they were exploring? You know, would they publish the truth if they knew about those things in a magazine like that? And would they allow us to still have it today if they did? All kinds of questions, again, with no answers, no true answers, but just we keep pushing it, expanding the vision of what we think and what they thought. And I feel like there's all kinds of different little discoveries that they made then that they didn't necessarily scratch out from history. And so there's insight to be gained from them. And, who knows whether just the fact that they're questioning the shape of the earth, they're questioning what the compass does, they're questioning the pyramids, the cavities, the age of everything, the interior, the ancient cities of Africa, the poles, the giants of Patagonia. They're questioning all these things in this time and to the king of Prussia. And I guarantee that they did stuff about it. I guarantee that things were moves were made, things were done and set in motion over this next 300 years that we don't know about, we're not privy to. And these discoveries are there waiting to be discovered because certain people know and they need to share it. Time to blow the whistle. I hope we enter a new era of awakening soon by having some of these answers revealed, whether the giants are real, like some ancient books, some ancient history of giants. If they were writing ancient books, which they have found some giant books, then what was their history? Was it the same as ours? Is it different? Do they tell about creating us? Do they tell about having us as pets? What do they know? I feel like if we keep digging underground and into the books, we might find some. And maybe as Smithsonians and Vaticans around the world get unleashed, if that ever happens, the treasure troves of knowledge that they keep from us will one day find the light of day, and all of us will just be in our glory. And no matter what distraction they try to make to stop people when that release comes, we will just see right through it and blast right through it, and humanity will get taken to the level it should be at, instead of the thumb and just the underground tunnel that we seem to be stuck in. We need to see the light of all of this knowledge, and we need to share it with everyone and make everyone feel the power that it does and the empowerment that it gives us to know that there's so much more than the lies we've been told. The confines of the mental prison they keep us in is just a small fraction of what is really out there. And people in the past always had that hint, and those are the people that make a difference. So if we build and we get enough people striving to understand, then one day we will. So thanks for joining me. Hope you like all this. There's more to come from these magazines, and share with whoever, do whatever. Bless you all.